Thanks for making the weapons dealers rich. How many innocent people died because of you? What kind of honor is that? That's what they yelled loud enough for the whole section to hear. To a veteran, to a man who had just been honored in front of thousands. He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because 5 rows above, a retired general stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He just said 10 words. And those 10 words, they stopped the game. They silenced the crowd, and they changed everything. You think you know who our heroes are? Think again. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Earl Dandridge sat quietly in the passenger seat, his hands folded over a clean pair of slacks. His posture, as always, was straight, but his eyes gave him away, drifting, distant, unfixed. At 62, Earl had lived a life of formality. 22 years in the U.S. Army had shaped everything from the way he walked to the way he closed doors. Even now, long retired, those instincts clung to him like the shadow of a uniform no longer worn. He lived in a modest home in Littleton, Colorado, with his wife Lorraine and their 2 grandkids. His daughter Melissa had moved in after her divorce, and though the house was full, Earl rarely spoke more than needed. He loved them deeply, but the war had left him with a quiet kind of love, one measured in acts rather than words. It was Melissa who had surprised him with the news. "They picked you, Dad," she had said one morning at breakfast, "to be honored during the 7th inning break, on the field, big screen and all." He didn't respond right away, just took a sip of black coffee, eyes still on the kitchen window, watching a bird flutter across the fence line. She leaned forward. "It's for Veteran Appreciation Week. You should be proud." Earl nodded once, not out of agreement, but acknowledgement. Now, as they pulled into the stadium lot, he still hadn't spoken about it. Melissa was behind the wheel. In the back seat, the younger of his 2 grandkids, 6-year-old James, swung his legs and hummed the team's theme song. 12-year-old Ellie sat beside him, reading the program, stopping at the page with her grandfather's name. "Grandpa," James chirped, "did you fight the bad guys like in those war movies?" Earl gave a half smile, glancing at him in the mirror. "Sometimes I had to run faster than them," he said. "That's how I kept my lunch." Ellie looked up. "What's this ring? It looks old." She pointed to the dull silver on his right hand engraved with a unit number, mostly worn down. He rotated it slowly. "Just something from a long time ago." In the driver's seat, Lorraine reached over and took his hand, gently but firmly. She didn't speak. She never needed to. After 37 years together, her silence often meant more than words. As the car idled at the security gate, Earl's gaze turned to the horizon. The sky was blue, but his mind colored it with dust tan, yellow, and burnt orange. Kirkuk. He remembered the heat pressing in through his gear, the clatter of distant gunfire, and the twisted metal of a Humvee wrapped around flames. A man had died screaming that day. Earl never remembered the man's name, just the sound. He blinked it away. Vindan. He didn't think the word meant anything anymore. The stadium was buzzing when they entered. People in jerseys, vendors shouting, kids running between knees. Everything was bright and cheerful. It only made Earl feel more like a shadow. They took their seats 10 rows from the dugout. Melissa was chatting with the kids, trying to keep the mood light. But Earl noticed a few things others might not. A man in a backwards cap 2 rows up leaned toward his buddy and muttered, "Oh, great. Another flag-waving ceremony." The friend laughed under his breath and kept sipping from a beer. Earl didn't flinch, but Lorraine caught his eye. She said nothing. The field stretched before them in manicured perfection. Somewhere, a camera panned slowly over the stands. The big screen flashed pre-recorded interviews with fans talking about their favorite moments in Rocky's history. As the 2nd inning closed, Melissa checked her watch. It's almost time. Earl adjusted his collar, then stood when the stadium usher called his name softly. He stepped into the aisle, walking past strangers and nacho trays and half-spilled beers. The usher guided him down a tunnel, then out onto the edge of the field. The announcer's voice came through the speakers, smooth and rehearsed. Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor a man who served this nation for over 2 decades, a veteran of multiple overseas tours. Please welcome Earl Dandridge. Applause rolled through the stands. Some stood, some clapped absently while checking their phones. Earl heard it, but it felt distant. To him, the sound was hollow, like rain on a tin roof, familiar, repetitive, without warmth. He walked to the pitcher's mound at a steady pace. His back was straight, his steps even, but his eyes weren't on the crowd. They were fixed beyond the outfield, at something only he could see. The desert, maybe, or the convoy that never returned. The big screen above left field lit up with his image, Earl Dandridge, standing alone in a stadium of thousands. Back in the stands, James stood on his seat, waving with both arms. Ellie tugged at Melissa's sleeve. He looked so serious. Melissa wiped the corner of her eye with the back of her hand. That's just how he is, sweetie. Earl didn't wave, didn't smile. He simply stood with his hands at his sides, taking it all in. Not out of pride, not even gratitude. He was surviving it. The moment ended with a pre-recorded jingle and a polite round of applause. The usher tapped him on the arm, gesturing him back. Earl turned and began the slow walk off the field. As he passed the edge of the dugout, he heard someone near the rail say, under their breath, "They just hand those honors out now." "Huh?" Another voice replied. "Yeah, anyone who wore boots and didn't trip gets a trophy." He didn't stop, didn't turn, but the old pain throbbed in his chest again, more bitter than blood. He climbed the steps back to the stands, returning to his family. James tried to hug him, but Earl just patted the boy's shoulder. A few rows behind them, someone snorted. Bet he never even left the desk. Earl didn't react. But inside, the wind was starting to rise. He sat down, exhaling slowly. Lorraine placed her hand on his knee. On the screen above, the broadcast cut back to the game just before the cameras caught something they weren't supposed to. One of the field cameras, still running, happened to swing across the section where Earl now sat. In the frame, his stiff profile, his unsmiling face, and behind him, 3 men leaning in, saying something cruel. The feed didn't cut in time. It flickered on screen just for a second before the technician upstairs realized and yanked it away. But that second was enough. A murmur moved through the rows. Someone whispered, "Was that?" Another said, "Did you hear what they said up in the control room?" The director frowned, staring at the frozen frame on a side monitor. He reached for the mic, but before he could say anything, someone else stood. Far up in the VIP section, an older man had risen to his feet. He wore no suit, no uniform, just a press shirt and slacks, a cane in one hand. The other clenched around the metal rail in front of him. His hair was white, his bearing, unmistakable. Even at a distance, Earl recognized him, not by name, by posture, by presence. The man had seen war, and he was walking now slowly, deliberately down toward the field. Melissa looked up, confused. Earl just sat there, eyes narrowing, his hand curled around the ring on his finger. Something was about to shift. And Earl, though he didn't know it yet, was no longer alone under that spotlight. Not anymore. The applause had barely faded when Earl returned to his seat. He moved slowly, as if each step was heavier than the one before. James reached for his hand, eager to share his excitement. Earl offered him a quick pat on the back, but his face remained unreadable. Behind them, 3 men leaned in, loud enough to be heard. One wore a faded black t-shirt with the words, "No More War" in angry block letters. Another held a plastic cup of beer in one hand, his arm draped over the back of his seat. The third one, younger, quieter, smirked, but said nothing. "Well, that was a waste of a spotlight," the man in the t-shirt muttered. "Yeah," the one with the beer added. "Thanks for keeping the arms dealers rich." "Old man." Earl didn't move. The smirking one leaned forward. voice colder than the others. Bet you never saw action. Probably sat behind a desk and counted aid money. Melissa froze, turning halfway around. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Her grip on Earl's arm tightened, but Earl only sat down, slowly, carefully, like someone returning to a trench he thought he'd left behind. The words didn't surprise him. The tone didn't, either. What caught him off guard, what stuck like gravel in his chest, was how easy it all felt. Like the decades in uniform, the pain, the silence, the losses. None of it had mattered. He stared straight ahead. The field was alive again with movement. Vendors passed by with popcorn trays. Fans resumed conversations. But inside Earl, something else cracked open. The words from behind still echoed, but louder, crueler, came the sounds from long ago shouting in Arabic. Bullets ricocheting off metal, the crackle of flames consuming a transport truck. He saw Ortega again, saw the young corporal reaching out from under twisted steel, crying out before the blast swallowed his voice. The bitterness in Earl's throat swelled. He wanted to say something, anything, but his tongue stayed glued to the roof of his mouth. His heart thudded against the cage of his ribs, and his jaw clenched not in anger, but in shame. Melissa reached for his hand again. This time, he squeezed it, not to seek comfort, but to keep her from turning around. Don't give them anything. He would absorb this, like he had absorbed everything else. But the field cameras weren't finished with him. Up in the broadcast booth, one of the camera operators kept scanning the crowd for fan reactions. The wide lens drifted across section 109 and landed, unintentionally, on Earl. The screen above left field flickered, and there he was again, not on the mound, not smiling for a photo, but seated, face tight, posture rigid, with 3 men behind him mid-laughter, mid-insult. The production team hesitated. The feed had gone live for 2 full seconds before someone shouted, "Cut to commercial." But it was too late. Dozens of people had seen it. A mother pointed at the screen. "Honey, don't look." Her son had already noticed. Why is that man being mean to the old guy? An older couple a few rows away leaned in. "Did you see that? I think I did." The ripple was starting. In the broadcast room, the technical director swore softly. "Where's security?" someone muttered. Another voice asked, "Is that guy the same vet we just honored down in the stands?" Earl still hadn't noticed. But Lorraine had. She'd caught the faint reflection of the big screen in her sunglasses. Just as the image flashed, she looked up sharply, then turned to Earl. He hadn't moved, but something in his breathing had changed, slower now, tighter, like he was bracing for impact. Behind them, the man in the t-shirt chuckled. "Hope that got you a free hot dog." The guy with the beer took a swig. "Seriously, man, they act like every vet's a damn hero." Melissa opened her mouth again, fury building in her chest, but then stopped. Something was happening in the rows above. A man was rising to his feet. He didn't stand like a civilian. He unfolded. His back was slightly hunched, but there was a commanding weight in the way he reached for his cane, then stepped forward. His shirt was pressed, sleeves rolled neatly at the elbow. His shoes leather, polished, caught the light. People in the nearby rows began to notice. A few turned, a couple even stood, unsure why. He made his way slowly down the aisle. Step, tap, step, tap. The cane hit concrete like a ticking clock. When he reached the landing above Earl's row, he stopped. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm but charged. The 3 men turned. They saw a silver-haired man with piercing eyes. His skin was tanned, marked by time. His left hand rested on the head of his cane. His right held nothing but tension. "I saw what you said," he continued, voice louder now, "and I saw who you said it to." Beer guy blinked. "And who the hell are you?" The man gave a small smile. "Major General Marshall Greeley, U.S. Army, retired, and the man you're mocking, he pointed to Earl, he's the reason I'm still breathing. The smirk drained from the quiet one's face. T-shirt man narrowed his eyes. Look, we didn't mean anything. It was a joke. No, Greeley said. You meant every word. That's the problem. Melissa was frozen. Lorraine's hand trembled on Earl's shoulder. But Earl was staring straight ahead, eyes wide now, blinking once, then twice, like waking from a long, hard sleep. I was with him in Kirkuk, Greeley said. I watched him run into a minefield because a truck had flipped on the highway and the insurgents were closing in. I watched him carry 2 men out of fire, bleeding from his own shoulder, and then go back for more. The words hit the air like thunder. Greeley stepped forward, no longer leaning on the cane. You sit there and throw beer breath and sarcasm at him like you understand even one day of what he's lived through. You couldn't. The man with the beer tried to look away. The one in the t-shirt muttered again. This is ridiculous. Greeley raised a hand, just one. The screen flickered back on. This time, it was no accident. Someone in the control room had made a choice. The big screen filled with an image from the archive's grainy footage of a military convoy under attack. The desert blurred by dust. A soldier running through smoke. Screams in the background. The crowd started to quiet. A second clip played Earl, younger, dragging a man across broken asphalt, his shirt soaked in blood, his mouth shouting something off camera. A Humvee burned in the distance. Gasps echoed around the stadium. Someone whispered, "Is that him?" A teenage boy near third base stood up. Holy crap. Back in section 109, Greeley turned back toward Earl, voice low again. I've waited years to see your name where it belongs, he said. I didn't think it would be on a scoreboard, but it'll do. Earl looked up at him, truly looked at him for the first time. The 2 men locked eyes, not as strangers, not even as friends, but as brothers in arms who had walked through the same fire and somehow come out breathing. Greeley raised a hand in salute. Earl hesitated, then stood, slow and deliberate. His hand rose, palm flat, fingers sharp, and he returned the salute. The stadium held its breath. No music, no narration, no announcement, just 2 old soldiers, and the silence that had finally become respect. Somewhere in the crowd, a man put down his phone. Another removed his cap. No one clapped, but no one mocked either, because in that moment, everything had changed. The stadium didn't fall quiet. It sank into it. Greeley's voice cut through the air, not loud, not angry, but sharp as glass. That man you laughed at, he said, pointing with a single finger, is Staff Sergeant Earl Dandridge. Eyes turned, heads followed, and the ripple became stillness. He was in Kirkuk when our convoy was hit. An IED took out the lead truck. Fire everywhere, smoke, chaos, gunfire, then silence. Until one man ran forward. Greeley's breath hitched, just once, but his voice stayed steady. He didn't wait. He didn't ask. He sprinted into a minefield to pull out 2 men trapped under a burning Humvee. He was hit, still went back in, pulled out another, and another. The words didn't need flourish. They didn't need applause. They just hung there. Heavy, true, undeniable. I saw it. Greeley finished. I witnessed it. He saved 17 lives that day. Somewhere up in the control booth, someone moved fast. The director gestured frantically toward one of the feed operators. Run it. Run the old clip. Now. The screen above the left field bleachers went black for a beat. Then, grainy video footage emerged. A desert road, blurry edges, sand in the lens. A wrecked convoy scattered across the screen. One vehicle flipped, another in flames. Screaming in the background. Gunfire snapping at the corners. Then, from the haze, a soldier appeared, helmet askew, uniform torn, shoulder slick with blood, dragging another body by the collar. Stumbling through smoke, the camera jerked with panic but caught it again, this time clear. The man dropped to one knee beside a second body, lifted the soldier with both arms, and staggered back through the fire. There was no doubt. It was Earl, even older now, heavier, grayer. There was no mistaking the shape of his face, the tension in his brow, the sheer force in his body. On the field, the video played in silence. In the stands, a single gasp rose. Melissa's hands flew to her mouth. Her shoulders shook with something between pride and heartbreak. Lorraine leaned forward, eyes wide, whispering like a prayer. "You never told us, Earl, not even once." James sat frozen. Ellie reached over, and the two grandkids held hands, eyes fixed on the screen like it was holy. The footage continued. Earl crouched beside a young Marine, shielding him with his body as a second explosion hit off screen. His mouth moved. His eyes were locked forward, focused, fierce. He looked nothing like a hero. He looked like a man doing what had to be done. The clip cut to black. No music followed. No logo. No tagline. Just Earl's name. Then the words Kirkuk, Iraq, October 2007. Back in section 109, no one moved. Not even the three hecklers. The one in the No More War shirt finally looked down. The one with the beer fumbled his cup. The quiet one, who'd only smirked until now, looked like he might throw up. The t-shirt guy began, barely audible. "We didn't know. We were just joking." The woman seated 2 rows in front turned around. Her eyes narrowed. "Yeah," she said quietly. Still funny. Now no one laughed. The man with the beer opened his mouth, then shut it again. Nobody touched them. Nobody yelled. But the silence was sharper than any confrontation. As they stood to leave, the aisle parted wordless, unwilling to look them in the eye. They didn't storm off. They just walked, slowly, as if the weight of their ignorance was finally catching up. And now, only Earl remained seated, still, as if rooted to the earth. Greeley turned toward him once more. His voice dropped, low and personal. "I never got to thank you." Earl finally lifted his eyes. The two men held the moment like soldiers hold a last order between them, an entire history spoken without a single syllable. Then Greeley stood at attention. His hand rose in a precise, sharp salute. Earl hesitated, but only for a breath. Then he rose. The stiffness in his legs didn't matter. The pain in his back was ignored. He stood tall, straighter than he had in years, and returned the salute slow, solemn, exact. For a moment, no one breathed. The stadium didn't cheer. It watched. Every screen in the arena fixed on them. Earl, with a streak of silver in his hair and weight behind his eyes. Greeley, the man who remembered. On the big screen, the camera zoomed in. Earl's face lined, firm, quietly radiant, not proud, not boastful, but seen. A slow clap broke the stillness. It came from a young boy, 2 rows down. His father looked at him, then joined in. Another hand joined from the left, then one from the upper deck. The sound built, not like a roar, but like a tide. Honest, undeniable. A woman stood up, wiping her eyes. Then another man, hand over heart. Then dozens more. And soon, the stadium stood. Not at once, not in perfect order, but like a wave of conscience, rolling from section to section, rising with every second. Melissa turned to her father, her voice thick. "They know now. Dad, they finally know." Lorraine's eyes never left Earl's face. She whispered one word, just one, "You." Earl didn't smile. He just stood, hand still by his side, breathing like a man who'd been underwater far too long. Up above, the screen faded one last time, leaving only the image of him saluting. No sponsor, no branding, only honor. The announcer didn't speak. The cameras didn't pan. Because some moments weren't meant to be packaged. They were meant to be remembered. And across the stadium, for the first time in a long, long while, Earl Dandridge wasn't invisible. He was exactly where he belonged, in full view. The house was quiet, not in a tense way, not like something was waiting to break, just quiet, in that rare kind of peace that settles in once noise has said everything it needed to say. Earl sat in his favorite chair by the window, the late morning sun cutting across his lap. He wasn't reading, wasn't sleeping, just sitting, his fingers slowly rotating the silver ring on his right hand. It was the same ring that had been with him through 3 deployments, 3 presidents, and 17 funerals. He stared at it like he'd never really seen it before. I never asked for any of that. He finally said. Lorraine looked up from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. I know, she said. I still don't think I deserve it. But, he paused, turning the ring again. That night, when the kids looked up at me, I didn't want them to see a man who walked away from his story. He took a breath, not deep, not heavy, just enough. I didn't need the applause. I just needed them to know I wasn't afraid. Lorraine walked over and rested her hands on his shoulders. They saw you, Earl. Every piece of you. He looked up at her. I didn't need the stadium or the screen. I just needed this house and the 3 of you in it. She smiled, kissed the top of his head, said nothing more. Later that afternoon, Melissa came by holding a sealed envelope. Letter came for you. Dad, she said, setting it on the table. Earl didn't touch it right away. He waited until the sun had shifted across the floor, until the shadows were long again. Then he opened it. The handwriting was neat, almost military in its precision. Earl, I remember the day you refused that medal in Kirkuk. You said, give it to the ones who didn't come home. They earned it more than I ever did. You haven't changed. That's why I knew I had to stand up for you. Some debts don't get paid with stripes or citations. Some debts you repay by standing when others stay seated. You stood for us back then. I just returned the favor. Greeley Earl folded the letter slowly, smoothed the crease, set it back in the envelope. Melissa watched him, then opened a drawer and placed it carefully inside. No one said a word, but it stayed there, nestled between a couple of old photographs and a service ribbon he'd never displayed. Over the next few days, the clip of the stadium moment started making its way across the internet. A cell phone recording, uploaded by someone in the crowd, had gone viral before dawn the next morning. There was no commentary, no music, just the raw feed, Earl standing, Greeley saluting, and the stadium rising behind them. It was reposted by veterans groups, military pages, even parenting blogs. The caption most often copied beneath it read, "Real heroes don't ask to be seen, but sometimes they're seen anyway." Another post, written by a father who had been in the stands with his son, read, "My boy asked me if that man was a superhero. I told him no. I said he was something better, a man who did the right thing even when no one was watching." It reached over 2 million views in 48 hours. Earl never saw it. He didn't have Twitter, didn't care much for YouTube. When Melissa offered to show him, he just shook his head. Let them talk. He said gently, I've said what I needed to say. 1 week later, Earl took James and Ellie back to the stadium, not for a ceremony, not for a speech, just for baseball. They arrived early. The lot was half empty, the wind a little cooler than usual. James ran ahead with a glove almost bigger than his head. Ellie held a snack bag and walked beside her grandfather. At the gate, the same security guard from the previous game glanced up, then straightened. He gave a crisp nod. Good to see you again, sir. Earl returned the nod. Just here for the game. The guard didn't push, just smiled, then stepped aside. They made their way through the concourse. Fans milled about. Vendors set up trays. Everything felt normal again, except this time, Earl didn't feel invisible. When they reached their section, Melissa was already waiting with popcorn and bottled water. James darted to the front row. Same seats. Earl moved toward the familiar spot. Then he saw it. Right where he had sat, seat 12, row D, there was a new plaque. Not large, not flashy, just a brushed metal plate fastened to the backrest. It read, "This seat once belonged to a man who stood when others stayed silent." Earl stood still for a moment, Melissa said softly. "They put it up 2 days ago. Stadium management reached out. I didn't tell them anything. They already knew." He blinked once, then sat. James leaned over the railing, eyes on the batting cage. Ellie looked at the plaque, then up at her grandfather. "Grandpa," she asked, "are you a hero?" Earl didn't answer right away. He just reached over and ruffled her hair, eyes drifting toward the sky. The clouds were low and soft, the kind that never promise rain, just presence. "I'm your grandfather," he said at last. That's enough. But deep inside, something had shifted. He still didn't want medals, still didn't want crowds. But for the first time in years, he didn't flinch when the past came close. He didn't need to run from it, didn't need to hide behind silence. He simply let it live beside him. The game began. The announcer's voice echoed across the stadium. Fans cheered as the first batter stepped up. And Earl Dandridge, surrounded by family, sat quietly in his seat, not honored, not elevated, just whole and at peace with being seen.